morning. And it's nice to have a look at painting in watercolour this week. So I thought we would do a nice sunset, and it's just a nice cheery at any time of the year. So beautiful and so inspiring when you look at the colours in the sky and all of the different effects with clouds and everything. So I thought it would be nice to kind of do quite a nice watery scene this morning. So I'll flip my camera over and enjoy. There we go. Okay, so to start out with, I've just got a small watercolour, quite thick piece of watercolour paper actually. If you're working a bit bigger, you might want to tape it down to the board that you're working on, or whatever surface you've got to work on, just so it, you know, it keeps it still and it's not as likely to buckle. If you're going to put on loads and loads and loads and loads of layers and you want to do this over several hours, then I would suggest, you know, you go for a nice really thick piece of paper, or alternatively you can wet your paper overnight, let it dry, attach it, you know, whilst it's attached to the board with some tape, and then it won't buckle the next day. So here we go. So after I've just got this little bit of paper, I'm just going to test some colours on. I've got this particular picture, but there's some beautiful ones. And the reason I've chosen this one is it's slightly more complex than, for example, in some ways, than having a sandy area. We've got, you know, segments to each of these pictures here. It's just preference really. You know, we've got quite a blended sky here, some waves and some sand. So I thought I'd go for this one because there's quite a lot of reflection. This is actually not water. It's just wet, very, very wet sand. There's a little bit of water over the top and it's receding, but it just gives an interesting reflection from the sun. So there isn't actually sand as such that we can see. We can see the reflection of the skies and the colours through here. So it looks quite an interesting one to do. So really the key is with watercolour, the main things to think about in this session when you're doing you know, more of a kind of a seascape, landscape, is, you know, how wet you want to get the paper. So I'm just going to tape off. I'm going to create, on purpose, I'm going to create two sections here for the sky, just in the middle, about in the middle of my page really. And because what I want to do is I just want to have a go, maybe take that slightly up. I'm just putting some masking tape on. You can buy watercolor specific tape as well, but I'm quite happy with using good old masking tape really. And I've sectioned this off because what I want to do is actually, you know, create quite a wet surface in the top. I don't actually want it to run into the bottom as yet, and I'm going to make it quite wet. So if I don't have the tape on, it will run down. Some people really like that, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to kind of create clear section between, you know, the sky areas and the, you know, the rolling waves here and then the beach, then it's just a nice way of doing it. So what I'm going to do is use a biggish brush, a nice flat brush, to kind of get all of that colour on there. The main things you've got to watch carefully are if you're using blues and things like that in the sky, and then you go and put yellow over the top when it's wet, you're going to get greeny grey, and sometimes you don't want that. So you might have to think in advance about blocking some of those little colours in first, or just leaving it and doing it afterwards. You can obviously think about working, whichever section you're working in, working light to darks. So I would suggest lights, then brights, then darks in each section, and obviously reserving anything that needs to be kept very, very light or white. Don't put that on the paper if you can help it, but this one's not got much white in it, to be fair. So that I can see. So obviously one of the important things is testing your colours. If we're mixing a lot of colours together, which I'm just going to do, I'm just going to move my palette over slightly so you can see the colours. I've got a pan watercolour here, as I did last week, and obviously I might mix a few colours together. So go for, you know, whichever colours you really like as well. It doesn't have to be identical to the picture. It's our representation of the picture. So I'm going to make sure though, whatever I am using, I'm going to mixture of these two, because it's quite very, very bright yellow is my lemon yellow, and I want it just slightly warmer. So I'm adding a bit of warmth to it. And all I'm doing with my pan is like, you know, mixing it into this section so that I've got enough. I may go darker on that there and just go, you know, straight over. So I'm just going to pop a bit of this in the corner for when I do that as well. The important thing is, once you've tested your colours, yes, I'm happy with that in the middle. Just got my jar of water and I'm making sure I'm cleaning my brush really well between these things. So that's the lemon yellow here. Yeah, I'm happy with that as well. So it's lemony with a slight touch of warmth. I'm going to mix up some blues here. Now, even on there, you can see that there's some darker areas, and I'm just going to mix those in afterwards. So I'm just going to go for a combination of blues here, actually. That's the beauty with pan. As long as you clean it up after so that the colours aren't crossing over, that's fine, but that's just how I use it. If I'm working quickly, obviously. So let's see, is this light enough? Okay, maybe a bit dark, actually. I'm going to go a little bit more of this blue here. Right, let's see. So obviously we can thin the paint, so that would be fine for these corners, but I don't want that to be so so bright. So I'm actually just going to thin this paint right down, because obviously it's more translucent if we thin it down like that. So it's quite a nice colour. I can just go for if you wanted something more pure sky blue, you can go for something more like ultramarine. And I'm just using these sections at the side really to keep my paint separate with really on the palette. Okay, so there you go. So that's more of a sky blue look with your ultramarine. If that's what the look you want to go for, you know, you can go for that one. I have got a slightly darker blue in mind, but I actually might swip over. Let's see if that's right. Yeah, okay, I'll go for that one. I'm going to just drop in a bit more water. The key is actually making enough paint up once you've mixed it, especially if you're mixing a few colours together, just so that you know you've got enough to cover it, rather than thinking, oh no, I've run out. So I'm just testing these colours, and then I'm just going to mix up a little bit of this in here as well. This is almost like a grey colour. I'm going to not worry about that now, but I am just going to look at, because if I want to add it in, these pinks and things, whilst it's wet, I might actually want to do it now. So I'm going to go for a bit of an Alizarian crimson. And a touch of, which I'm going to clean my brush for really well. Use your little rag or something to clean it. And then let's have a look. I want to go for a yellowy colour in there as well, to get the colour that I desired, pink colour that I want. Okay, it's possibly slightly need a bit more Alizarian crimson in here, but you can go for, you know, use what you've got in your palette. You can go for like a more of a, you know, a reddy colour if you want to, a pinky reddy, sorry. Okay, yeah, I'm going to just try the lemony yellow in there. I would be, if this was acrylic, I'd be using a more Naples yellow. Okay, because we can always, the thing is, we can always darken these colours down afterwards a little bit by adding a bit more paint in there. See? Yes. Okay, Put slightly more water in there because I want to water this down a bit. Okay, right, so let's have a little look here. So we've sectioned this off. So I've got a big blob of water on my page now. Never mind. So the biggest thing, as I said, is overlapping. You've got to be a little bit careful. Sometimes when your paper's quite wet and you want it to be a bit more of a runny and a bit more, you know, give that real kind of watercolory feel where, you know, you can make it much more watery and you can blend colours in a bit more. Just got to be careful you don't overlap the yellows with blues and get these muddy greens almost. And also just be a little bit careful with how wet your sections are before you add in the next blocks of colour. So I'll show you in a moment what I mean by that, because if you start dropping in, like if it's really too wet and you drop it and you'll get those starburst effects which you can't get rid of, almost like a splat on your paper. So that's always trial and error. You're not going to know until you wet your paper how much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a clean paintbrush, and all I'm going to do is just lightly wet my paper all the way across here. Okay, I don't want it so wet that, let's see if I can get that in the camera. Yeah, I don't want it so wet that it's pouring, but you can, if you want it really watery, that is another option. I'm just wetting it. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to take out the section at the side where the yellow is going actually. So I'm just going to dab that off so it's not too wet, and I might just take out just a tiny bit of the section of where the orange is as well. And then I'm going to use a nice flat brush, and you can use the mop brushes as well for watercolor if you really want to. That's the other option. And I'm just going to start to drop in these colors, of these blue colors. Now what you can also do if you want to, you can turn it slightly on its side and let the colors run down. That's another way of doing it. Just slightly tilt it, and if it's really wet it will really run, and if it's not really wet it will just lightly, you know, lightly go down. So, you know, it just gives you a slight amount of more of control. So let's see. So I've kind of gone to here. All right. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some of those colours here that we've got, particularly the yellow. I'm going to pop this yellow in the side whilst it's damp enough. We'll use a slightly more smaller brush to control it a little bit, but you don't have, you know, it's up to you. Okay, and get my yellow in place so it's in there. Now if it starts to make too much of a run too much, you can always just very slightly, you know, dab off the edges that meet, so that it's not quite as wet and you can control the edges a bit more. But you might want to let it run. It's entirely up to you. It's the feel that you want to go for. So I'm just going to now pop in some of these yellows that I can see in here. And again, you know, everybody's different. Some people might want a really like kind of a linear feel to these clouds, and other people might want it to run a little bit more. So you've just got to have a little go. Like this. Okay, so again, this was less wet, so it just gives me a little bit more control. I'm just going to go up a size of brush now and just start to see if I can drop some of this in, some of this nice cloud. So I'm going to see if this responds well over the colours. Now I might need to, if it runs too much for me, I may need to just dry it off a little bit, or wait a bit longer till it's dried a little bit more. But actually I'm quite happy with that run. That's fine, it's nice and light. So I'm just going to just be careful not to mix it in too much. Just going to drop it in a little bit, because obviously, you know, even the pinks can become quite muddy in the blue sky if you're not careful. So just decide at the right time to drop those in. But that's really quite enjoyable, popping those in there. Quite good fun. And we can always darken off the areas in there if we want to as well. You know, if you've got any bits of those clouds that are darker, we can do that. But they're quite loose in that skyline, aren't they? So then I'm going to come back down here and have a look at, see how this responds. And I'm happy to start slightly lighter actually and build up my colorways over the top. So I'm not really too worried if it's too light at the moment. I just want to kind of get some of that base color in. Now again, you can experiment with using, and when we come to the sea bit, some of the salt and things we tried last week make quite interesting textures in the sea. So there we go. It's quite a nice overlap actually at the moment, is that? But obviously, you know, the bigger your paper is, you can spend more time doing that. I'm quite liking this flexibility. Okay. All right, so this is quite loose, which I'm enjoying. I think often the thing is that what can happen is, you know, it's getting used to a different style, especially if you've been using, you know, a more controlled way, using acrylics. It doesn't mean because it's looser, you know, that it's, you know, it's just adjusting your mind to a different style really than you've been working in. I actually really quite enjoy using these. And then, you know, whilst it's still wet as well, there is the flexibility. If you've got any very light areas, you can take those out with a clean wet brush or a bit of rag. So what I can do here, look, between these clouds, is I can just take out that small amount of colour like that. You see, just keep taking it off like I'm wiping it on a rag. So I can create. You've just got to work quite quickly if you want to take it out, especially because we're in the winter, we tend to be in, you know, slightly warmer room. So yeah, so just take those out while you can. Okay, let's see how that's going. Right, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop in a little bit more, use my bigger brush again, this round one actually I'm going to go for. I'm just going to drop in some slightly darker colours into the corners here where I can see like the sky is slightly darker. And just keep, because it's still damp enough here because we wet it, it'll move quite nicely. But again, if it dries, then there'll be less movement in blending wise anyway, not less movement, because we can always blend, you know, we can always add some more water to blend that down. And again, I'm going to pop some in here just to create a bit of variety in the sky, a bit of contrast between the lighter and darker areas, because that creates, you know, interest, which is really nice. There we go. Okay. So I'm happy with that. I'm just going to soften the edges with just a bit of clean water there. And then what else have we got? So I'm going to go in a little bit more before I put these very dark areas on. I'm just going to go in a little bit more and deepen some of the contrast between those red areas there in those darker areas. So let's have a look. I'm going to use a bit of alizarin crimson for some of the more cloudy bits. And I might just add a touch of that blue to it as well here, so that we've got this purpley colour almost. So I'm going to pop that in. And again, just make sure that you've got your areas are dry enough before you do that. This is still quite wet actually, so I might actually just hang on a minute with that area. Oh, what is that? Okay. I'm just, let's see, just moving that cloud. Okay, so what I'm going to go and try and do, I'm just going to get a slightly smaller brush. Okay, this is going to go into the grey cloud actually, so I'm just going to soften that down slightly with my clean wet brush. It's a brilliant tool for doing these bits and bats. Take that out. This a bit more area of light there. Okay, and then may need to come back, we'll see, to just some more orangey colours in there. I'm going to add a bit of depth with a bit of contrast with some orangey colours. I'm going to test those. Still a little bit on the bright side, I feel, for me, so I'm just going to go back slightly in my palette. But you can choose, really, you know, you can choose whichever colours really kind of you think, oh, I really like, you know. So let's have a look. There we go. Still a little bit of water on there, but it's quite nice because it's making it a bit more diffused. But again, just got to be careful. Don't, like I was saying about getting those star effects on there. You know, you can get a big blot on there. So it's how we do it, and it's trial and error. So as before, depends on, you know, how your paper reacts as well with the amount of water you put on it. So it's getting used to those tools that you've got as much as anything. So let's put a bit in there. So all I'm doing is creating slightly more contrast within the areas that I'm painting, and it's the contrast, you know, that makes things you know, pop out really a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment. Just pop a tiny bit there, and then what I'm going to do, hoping over this side is a bit more dry now, I'm going to start to bring in some of these darker areas of cloud. And again, that's going to create contrast between the ones that we've done, and we've got to kind of bear with it really, because sometimes it looks very, very disjointed until we start take off the bottom half and we start on that. So don't worry about that. It will look feel like it's working more, is what I meant to say. Excuse me. So in terms of mixing the cloud cover, you can go for a grey, or you can go for a blue based mix. So I've just mixed there, look, really dark blue with you could use like something like a Prussian blue or something, or just a dark edge blue, and then I'm going to use a bit of alizarin crimson in with that. So I need to mix up a bit more of that, I think, because I might even use some of this mix in the sea. So see, there we go. So I can just mix a little bit more. So darker blue, alizarin crimson. Oh, is that going to be too thick? No, I'm happy with that actually. I can always water it down a tad. Let's just water it down a tad and see. Look how that bit of paper is getting a lot of a lot done on it, which is fine. So let's see if we can start to pop in. I'm going to try this bit of cloud at the bottom here where there's been the least amount of water put on. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. You can fluff the clouds up with the corner of your brush, your side of your brush if you want to. You know, might want to go for less contrast, you might want to go for more, it's entirely up to you. So I'm just going to do the same again. I'm just using the top and brush to create the cloud shape there. Okay, that's it. I'll put this little bit, tiny bit in there, contrast behind the clouds. Right. Yeah, I'm just darkening off some of the areas behind that I can see. And then let's see where else I might pop some of that. I think that's pretty much almost there. There's just this little bit at the bottom that kind of overlaps with the colour here. And again, it's just making sure it doesn't bleed into absolutely everything. So if it starts to do that, just dab off a little bit of the moisture and it'll be fine. So I can also see there's a little bit of splayed cloud just above here. And again, can you drop it in? Will it be okay? Well, you can only decide as you're going really and see. It's just one of those things, it's practice to see how much it will take. Okay, so I'm quite happy there. Just going to just pop a little bit more depth here. I'm just going to bring in a little bit of this cloud cover into there. Right, well, I feel quite happy with that at the moment. I'm not going to paint that yet until this is dried off quite a bit, but I'm working quite quickly today. So, but yeah, you can try any colours in there that you want to. I'm going to take off this, and I've got a nice kind of clean line there to do the middle section. So you can decide, are you going to do the middle section or do you want to do the bottom one? Well, if you feel that that's dry enough and it's not going to kind of get too much in, I think this will be fine because this kind of overlaps a little bit here. Then you can just paint in that middle section. You can even just pop this at the bottom like that. Work your way down if you want to. And I'm going to put a little bit more control in here. So I think a lot of people will say, well, what do I do about, the waves and creating the waves and everything? Well, have a little look about, because some of these colours, some of these in here are quite, you've got these this reflection of this sun on the water here, and some of them are lighter. So you can leave the paper, or you can go for a very, very light blue in some of these areas. And then you can either work in the dark areas over the top of the light ones to create the contrast, or you can just take out, make sure you leave kind of a bit more plain. So again, I'm going to try and work light to dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this, where's the pinky colour? I have to mix it a bit more. Just make sure your brushes are really clean though. That's definitely the key at this point. It's very easy not to. See? Okay. So I'm just going to look for whereabouts this kind of middle this middle section is, I'm not actually wetting my paper like I did before, if you'll notice. I'm just going to work more in visual bands. So I'm just moving my paintbrush along to create that colour that I can see. It turns to quite almost like a turquoisey blue, doesn't it, over this side? So I'm just going to have a look. It does come in there a little bit. There's a tiny bit of pink in here, so that I can see, but you'll have to see what you can see on yours. And this is the thing, it's all very relative. So I'll continue through. I'm just going to actually see what that comes like. I like that. I'm going to use a little bit more. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to take this, put a little bit between here, and just bring it all the way over. There's a little bit going back, but I'd say I'm going to drop in just slightly a bit darker colour going back. And then this very top layer where we've almost got, I'm going to leave a little bit of that, the back of the paper, the white of the paper. So when I'm going to go across here, I'm going across with this. This was getting slightly darker, so I'm going to apply just a bit of the ultramarine actually in there as well. And then again, I'm going to follow. It's a light, definitely lighter blue with a very, very small drop in it. I'm going to mix those two colours up just so we get a tinge of each colour going across here on this middle section. It is a bit pinky. But then I'm going to take the blue, those two blues together, over this side a bit. And then as you notice, I don't know if you've seen here, it's really getting quite much darker, isn't it, over here? So I'm going to go in with that colour, with that greyish colour we mixed up over this side. But I'm obviously, because I've not wet my paper, I've got a bit more control over where that goes. But yeah, it's quite noticeably much darker over there. So you can, you can still reflect those colours in the sea quite nicely, which is great. So here we go. So I'm just looking, is there anything else that I need to put in there? I'm just still looking at the colours. Let's go for a bit over here. This is all, obviously I've got these colours in, and then I'm going to replicate that underneath, actually under here. But what I am going to do, as long as it's dry enough, I might change down so I've got a bit more control with the brush. I'm going to go for this colour that we mixed up, which was, but I'm going to make it darker. So this was the ultramarine blue, wasn't it? And then we had alizarin crimson in there as well. So all I'm going to do is just apply more pigment to it. So I'm going to add more pigment to my brush, and you've got to also decide how much more do you need to apply of the purpley colours, or is there a violet you want to go down to, so the tone is just a bit more. So I'm going to compare how dark that is. Okay, so I'm going to drop it down again. This is instead of me using a black. And drop it down again. I may even go a little bit to a Prussian blue. Let's see. Right, let's see. This is quite. You see how heavy that pigment is, how dark it is. So I've got to be careful. Now keep my contour. I'm quite happy with that actually. It's quite blue, but I do need a contrast between the rest of the sea and this area, really. So these are obviously underneath the waves where we get there's a bit more purple in actually. Underneath the waves, obviously where we get the what, you know, the waves, the shadow. So what I might do is just create a tiny, not make it totally straight, but just create a little bit of a shape in there so that we can see this movement. Now, if you have any light bits in between those waves, just leave the white of your page. That's all you need to do. So I'm looking over this side, it's still quite dark. You can go even darker over this side in the shadow, actually, if you want to. I could drop in another colour, but I'm quite happy for the moment with what I've got here. Okay. So I'm still wiggling this. Okay, let's have a look. So I've got another little one in there, so I'm going to pop this one in. But again, you're just making a judgment about what you can see in the shape of it that you want to create. You can go darker. You know, I just quite like blue. As long as I get a good contrast, that's the most important thing. Right, so there's quite a lot of like greyish colour here and less of the where the waves are broken. So I'm going to leave some of this not quite so dark there. And I'll put the final layer of where it's breaking here. And same on this side. You can even, if the waves kind of go in and out as well like that, you can even show that. There we go. Right, so what we can do then is, if you've got these kind of back, people said, you know, have given feedback and said, actually, I can't create too much of a, I don't know how to get the, you know, a break between the sky and the water. So what you can do is like have a little look at where the, you know, you get these broken shadows at the back. If you can see, you know, working into that kind of water, you can start to work into that back bit of water with the, you know, where you get the shadow dip of the waves, and then obviously that then gives a great contrast to the light sections of the waves as well, and start to put those in. So it's not like a hard line, because we want to keep that nice, you know, that nice feel of it being very natural. But what you can do is kind of work in some of those shadows in there, which are really nice. There you go. Okay, so if you've got an area, I'm just looking at this area, I'm not as happy with that, so I'm just going to blend that a little bit there. Okay, so there we go. So we're working our way down, aren't we? So we've done quite a lot now. So if you want to put any more depth into this other area here as well, you know, where you've got some of this light coming on, you can you know, create a bit more depth around it if you want to. Just make sure your brush is clean so you don't have all those muddy colours going in. You can almost kind of do like that. And you can create a bit of interest by just dropping in some brights in there. Go. Okay. Right, so I'm going to leave that. So what I want to do is just see how it balances with the bottom once I start to work on that. So this is where we start to see a little bit more happening, don't we? Which is quite interesting. So again, down here, we've got all sorts of things going. So the difference with the sky, we've got the similar colours reflected, but it is more washy. So what we can do is put this on in two halves, really. Be mindful of these lighter areas in between the darks here. I'm going to pop in the sky, which is slightly reflected, slightly darker, if you'll see, okay, than this. So I'm going to go for a slightly darker colour each time. You'll see this cloud is darker, this is slightly darker, these colours are slightly darker, but we do need enough of a contrast with the water in the middle to know that it's still, you know, we've still got the whole sky reflected in and it's wet water. We can put those on whilst they're wet. And then what we can actually do is we can then, once they're drying, we can start to create the shape with these darker areas over the top, and then with the shadows, and then the room as well. So I'm just going to soften this first. This area of water here needs to go on. So you can do the same if you want to. You can do exactly the same as you did earlier on. Okay, there we go. So, you know, we can do what we did before if you want to do that. Wet the areas that you want to work into, just with a bit of water. You can let them run. This is a nice opportunity if you enjoy doing the salt. It's, you know, you can pop the salt in some of the waves or another area. So again, it's just making sure it's not too wet. Okay, and then I'm going to start to drop in some areas. So what I want to do is mix up. I'm going to mix up this nice turquoisey colour, and I want to pop in a bit of that blue as well, just to give it slightly, make it just slightly reflect, a bit darker than the, there we go. And this is my lightest area, isn't it? So I want to make sure I've got this going in, and the shape coming out that I want in there, you know. So again, you know, look at how whether it's dry, that's actually really quite damp. So I'm just going to just gently dab that off quickly while I can. I think this, I've made that water too wet. And again, you're not going to know till you do it sometimes. So it's just being aware of it, really, I would say. So let's try again. That's better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some of this, the feel of some of this. Okay. There we are. But what I want to do as well is put a couple of brights on there. It might surprise, but actually sometimes I can make it quite interesting. Now, I think what's happening to my paper at the moment is it's got too wet. So this is a good example actually of just making sure you don't get your paper too wet, because I've also worked on both sides of this, but that's okay. So because I've made it too wet, I'm getting this classic kind of rubbing up of the paper. So don't do that. Or if you do, fine, you know, you'll work out how much of your paper will do. I've actually, because I think because I've got something on the other side of it as well, I'm trying to be good to the environment. There's only so much water it will take. There we go. So I'm going to go now for this yellowy colour. Pop this in the water at the side here, so I've got to be a bit careful that it's dry enough, it's not going to spread wildly. And what we can do to make this look more natural, you know, really quite natural with this, is that we can just use those darker tones over the top of it once it's dry to create the shape of the you know, the reflections. So I'm just going to bring this colour up here, just at the edge of the water actually. I don't want to go much further in. And I'm going to remove some of it before I drop in some of these darks here. So we've got some of these pinky colours that we made before. So I'm just going to make a bit more of that. And a bit of reds. Do is, I don't think I'm going to use too much more of that blue there. I'll just move that and then you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just using a bit of the Alizarian crimson that we had before, and a little bit of the yellow. Okay, it's looking a bit too, a bit more colour in it. So that's giving us this kind of purpley colour there, purpley blue. And then I want some of the orangey colour as well. This orangey, lovely orangey yellow, isn't it? That was a bit of this warm, nice warm yellow. Let's just mix that up in this corner. Not well, I've got to be careful. I just nearly mixed that with the blue, so that's a bit of a disaster if that happens, because it'll just make it really muddy. So, and then I'm going to also have a nice bright in there as a contrast, but a bit more water in it. Okay, so that can go on top. So I'm going to start again with the yellows, just make sure my brush has got none of those colours on it. I'm working down here. Let's Let's see if we can pop some of those in the water there. And it's drying off a little bit nicely now, which is good. So there we are. So on that side. Okay. There we go. And then I'm going to drop in some of these nice brights around it here under this represent kind of just does look lovely. And again, some of these we can put on afterwards on top. I'm not going to do too much there. Just a nice light covering underneath where that's going to go, just so we get some of the red showing through it, the orange showing through. Okay. Okay, right, so I'm just going to take some of these dark colours here, start to just pop those in, just drop those in. You can kind of wiggle them side to side as well to get a, you know, a bit of an effect in that water there. This one's not happy, this bit. Right. And then there's almost like a bit of this colour here, isn't there, through this blue water as well. So I'm just going to kind of pop that through nicely in between some of the blue, just to kind of where the ripples are. And I'm going to deepen that further, so that will look a bit odd at the moment, but that's fine. Deepen it further once I've got those in. I can almost see, can you see a little bit of orange as well? I can here through some of these ripples. So I'm just going to pop some of that colouring down there. I'll go a bit brighter actually. Yeah, there we go. Drop a bit bright in there. When this has dried off a bit, I will go over and put some nice really bright orangey colours in here. But I'm going to leave it to dry for a little while, just maybe that side would be okay. In between. So we can tell it's wet. It does give this nice effect actually in there, doesn't it? Right, that's probably okay now. There we go. We're trying to get this. So we'll water it down slightly. We do need to still keep that blue coming through a bit, but this will really help once we start to kind of get the contrast in there. Okay. And then really, you know, just going in with some of these darker colours down here as well. So I'm going to do that bit next. So they're slightly darker than the sky colours. So that colour I used up there was a mixture, I remember. It was a mixture of violet. I'm just going to leave this in here. A violet and blue. But I'm going to go for this Prussian blue, which is what the waves in. It is almost as dark as the waves actually, come to think of it, isn't it here? So we'll see if this is, so what I need to be careful of here is, yeah, it doesn't split. We want it to feel natural, but we don't want it to kind of override the yellow. So I'm just kind of poking it into there a little bit where the shadow is, just here we get these shadowy little lines, and then there's almost kind of a break line over the top there as well, isn't there, you know? And then we've got this darker shadow just underneath where it comes in there. Yeah. So it's how then we just start to bring out and create some of the natural shapes of the water and things of the water over the top of that. So I'm inclined to do it whilst it's wet, but without making too much of an impact. So I'm going to come around. I can always darken it off actually. Just kind of create some of these reflections over the top. Here. Over this side again, just going to create over the top of these reds. My tummy, sorry. And then there's a bit on the edges here, bit here. Okay, so that's all I'm doing is just pulling. Now you can, as I said, you can make contrast here darker if you want to. Pull these through and make them a bit darker. I'm going to put the thing in there. So what I'm going to do now actually is just darken the corners because I've not done that yet. So get my bigger brush again. It's quite a cool blue, is that? That's quite. There we go, that's better. I'll go for this, and I'm going to go for this. As before, but I'm going to pop a bit more blue in actually. Okay, let's have a little look. So I want it quite dark, so I'm looking for that contrast again. I can still pull, you know, and even in here, if there's any light bits, just leave that in the water. Leave the back of your page showing through in the back of the water. So right, so just going to bring this in now. Just bring it through. Okay. And that's where, you know, I'm actually happy with that for the moment, but I'm going to darken off some of the where the waves come through in a little bit more in a bit. But what I want to do now is put in this building and the reflection in the water there. And then I'll go back over anything that I think needs doing. So I am actually going to go for, you can go for, if you know, have a little look on it, because some areas within the, even within this building are darker than others, aren't they? I'm going to go for a bit of a Payne's grey, but you could use a bit of brown, you know, whatever colour you can see in there. And you can always, you know, I'm just going to put the legs through, so they come down here, don't they? You can always darken it off again. If you think it needs, you know, if it needs a bit more depth, you can always add more depth to some of the other areas in there. So let's have a go, bring that through. Just different thicknesses, isn't it? But that silhouette will, on the top of it, will actually be quite nice. But what you need is a bit more opaqueness, so you've not got the, you know, the waves coming through. So let's pop the edge here. Got some of those really nice, yeah, so these nice little features on here. You know, you can make that in keeping with the actual painting if you want. You can make it really orderly, or you can make it a bit like kind of nice and washy. So I will just go in with a bit more darken areas in there as well. If there's anywhere within the painting you think needs just darkening off a bit, you can do that. Okay, so I'm just going to go for a dark mixed with, what colour might that be? Maybe we'll go for a bit of a darky reddy colour here. It's just giving a hint that it is there. And again, whilst it's wet, if you want to, if there's any really light areas on it, just take it out with a paintbrush whilst it's still wet. A lot to be said about removal. Removal of paint. I'm learning all the time with watercolour myself. That it's nice to be able to have different techniques so that it makes it successful for you, especially when it's a very different medium. But very enjoyable. Okay, so I need to recreate this down here. So I'm going to go for, it's much more washy, isn't it? Much more loose. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to use my paintbrush a little bit to create, you know, very, just kind of like leave out some of the, you know, features of it. Just make it really loose in that C there. In these. There we go. So I'm going to wiggle a few through there, look, so I can see a bit of a thing. Now you can also, if you want to, you can actually, you know, if it's wet enough, you can actually take outlines again like we have done, but you have to do it really quite quickly if it's already soaked in. And then again, we can just darken any areas in that wash. And this is what I was saying, you know, I think, you know, it is quite transformative as you work through the piece, because you need all of those different elements in place, and you can continue going through and darkening, certain areas, or adding some more brights in there until you're happy. So there we go. So again, if you want to go and darken any of those, if there's any areas you think, actually, I want to just add a bit more depth, with a darker colour to any of those shadow areas, if you think they should be a bit darker or whatever, then there's always chance to do that. It just changes the feel of the painting, really. And or the sea or anywhere else. I think I'm going to stop there, and that's one of the things to know, is like when am I going to stop with this? It's just, I always think call it a day today when you think you're there and you've done enough, and sometimes when you actually, your mind's, you're thinking a lot, you think I've had enough there with it. Is a good indication. The only thing I might do actually is just take a bit more lemony yellow here, just make that a bit more, washy there. There we go. Okay, a bit happy with that. Right, well, I hope you've enjoyed this video again today. Just gives us another little insight into another few tips and techniques we can use, and enjoy the process of watercolor, because it doesn't have to be as scary as we think it is, and it's just fun to practice. So I just switch round, and I hope you have a lovely day. I'll see you on the next one. Right, and thank you very much. I really appreciate all of your time, and appreciate the fact that you've chosen to do this with me. So thank you. Bye.